For the moment, the only method of taking it alive which occurred to me was to pop over it a big tin canister which had contained soda lime. This canister was on the floor to my left. I moved toward it as nonchalantly as I could, keeping an eye on the shining wonder all the time. Directly I moved, its agitation perceptibly increased. It was, so to speak, all one whir of tremblement. It scintillated, as if its coloured scales had been so many prisms. It began to unsheathe its wings, as if it had finally decided that it would make use of them. Picking up the tin, disembarrassing it of its lid, I sprang toward my intended victim. Its wings opened wide. Obviously it was about to rise, but it was too late. Before it had cleared the ground, the tin was over it. It remained over it, however, for an instant only. I had stumbled in my haste, and, in my effort to save myself from falling face foremost onto the floor, I was compelled to remove my hands from the tin. Before I was able to replace them, the tin was sent flying, and while I was still partially recumbent, within 18 inches of me, that beetle swelled and swelled, until it had assumed its former portentous dimensions, when, as it seemed, it was enveloped by a human shape, and in less time than no time, there stood in front of me, naked from top to toe, my truly versatile Oriental friend. One startling fact nudity revealed. I had been egregiously mistaken on the question of sex. My visitor was not a man, but a woman, and, judging from the brief glimpse which I had of her body, by no means old or ill-shaped either. If that transformation was not a bewildering one, then 2 and 2 makes 5. The most level-headed scientist would temporarily have lost his mental equipoise on witnessing such a quick change as that within a span or two of his own nose. I was not only witless, I was breathless too. I could only gape. And while I gaped, the woman, stooping now, picked up her draperies, began to huddle them on her anyhow, and also to skedaddle towards the door which led into the yard. When I observed this last manoeuvre, to some extent I did rise to the requirements of the situation. Leaping up, I rushed to stay her flight. "Stop!" I shouted. But she was too quick for me. Ere I could reach her she had opened the door, and was through it, and what was more, she had slammed it in my face. In my excitement I did some fumbling with the handle. When, in my turn, I was in the yard, she was out of sight. I did fancy I saw a dim form disappearing over the wall at the further side, and I made for it as fast as I knew how. I clambered on to the wall, looking this way and that, but there was nothing and no one to be seen. I listened for the sound of retreating footsteps, but all was still. Apparently I had the entire neighbourhood to my own sweet self. My visitor had vanished. Time devoted to pursuit I felt would be time ill spent. As I returned across the yard, Woodville, who was still taking his rest under the open canopy of heaven, sat up. Seemingly my approach had roused him out of slumber. At sight of me he rubbed his eyes, and yawned and blinked. "I say," he remarked, not at all unreasonably, "where am I?" "You're on holy or on haunted ground, hang me if I know which. But that's where you are, my boy." "By Jove, I'm feeling queer. I have got a headache, don't you know?" "I shouldn't be the least surprised at anything you have or haven't. I'm beyond surprise. It's a drop of whisky you are wanting, and what I'm wanting too, only for goodness sake, drop me none of your drops. Mine is a case for a bottle at the least." I put my arm through his, and went with him into the laboratory. And when we were in, I shut and locked and barred the door. End of chapter 18. Recording by Alan Winterowd. Boomcoach.blogspot.com